Hello, Hillside family. I want to share the Hillside COVID-19 transition plan. 3 steps to get here. Step 1 was listening to you. So thanks for all the feedback. Over 300 of you provided feedback through the survey. Second step was that the staff put together a detailed plan based on your feedback. Third, we had a advisory task force that could also provide input made up of a range of people from different backgrounds and ages throughout the congregation. That was then brought to the Hillside Council last Monday night, May 18, and we approved the plan with a couple of modifications. So thanks. So 2 things before we get into the plan. First, want to make sure you understand it's a working document and we're going to adjust it as we learn more. And second, I wanted to share the survey feedback so you have an idea about why the staff created that plan that they did and why council approved it. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen and we'll give you a quick rundown of the survey feedback. Here we go. First question we asked is, in phase 2, where gatherings are limited to under 50 people, we now know they're going to be limited to under 10. What plans do you take or precautions do you plan to take, if any, in returning to any activity Hillside might hold at church? For example, a men's small group. A little over half said you'd wear a face mask. Over 3/4 or just about 3/4 stand and sit in places where you'd be at least 6 feet away. You'd avoid shaking hands, physical contact, pretty common sense stuff. And we also asked a second question, what would be your preference for worship? We assumed that it was going to be either live stream or in homes at that point, and 2/3 of you said you'd continue watching live stream at home, and just under 10% say you'd prefer to meet in small groups in homes or other places. Third question we asked was, once we get to the next step, where large gatherings are now limited to under 150 instead of 10, what best would describe your attitude towards returning to a worship service at Hillside? So right to the table. About 1/4 of you said you'd return the first opportunity that you have. A little over 1/3 said, yeah, I'll return, but with some concerns and precautions. Another 15%, I want to wait several weeks before I attend. And another 10% said, hey, it may be quite a while before I return. So if you start adding up some of those last answers, you might have about 30% who are pretty cautious and are not going to return at the first opportunity. So you can see we have a little bit of different of opinion on this one. Question 4, we asked you, before we told you what precautions we were planning to take, what precautions do you think you would take if returning to a worship service in phase 3, where gatherings are limited to, say, 150 people? At that point, because we're now maybe further down the pike, only 1/3 of you thought about face masks, where before it was just over half. Still, the majority is saying, hey, I'm going to social distance, and then an overwhelming majority saying I'm going to avoid shaking hands, avoid physical contact, etc. We then share with you what precautions we were thinking at the time of taking and whether you agreed or disagreed. Again, this is in phase 3. And you can see 2/3 would agree if we said we're going to strongly encourage the use of face masks. 1/3 would disagree. But 4 out of 5 would say, hey, limit handouts, do something different with the Lord's Supper in terms of how to distribute it, different way to collect offerings, definitely encourage social distancing, whether in the auditorium or in the foyer or in small group settings. Prop the door open, 90% there. Block off hallways, maybe have services outside, definitely provide hand sanitizer stations and discourage shaking hands. And 3/4 you said, hey, also don't start with coffee, at least to start, and definitely make sure you're keeping that building clean between services and maybe even allow a longer period of time between services. We also asked, would you be willing to attend your small group? About a little over 1/3 said yes. About 25% said not right away, or else I'd like to join virtually. A little over 1/3 don't have a small group. We asked about kids. I'm going to skip to the questions here about nursery. This assumed we were pretty well into phase 3 when we might be allowed or encouraged, advised to have gatherings limited to under 150. And about 40% of you said yes, that you'd be willing to take your kids to the nursery, and about 60% said no. When we then asked some questions about what precautions we should take with children's programming once that does eventually start. Some of the feedback here was pretty obvious. Reduced number of kids, don't seat them too close, prohibit snacks. Not big on the face mask, might scare the kids. And kids aren't going to be able to wear face masks. We threw that in there. Have the kids use hand sanitizer and plan activities where kids don't touch each other. We then asked about your comfort level into phase 3 again, where we were assuming we were at about 150. In terms of a gathering, what would you be most comfortable in terms of attending a worship service? And about 30% of you said half filled. Another little over a third said half filled, but I'd like to see every other row of chairs removed. And about just under 20% said, well, I'd feel more comfortable with it being a quarter filled with chairs removed. And you can see another 12% saying none of these. And the verbatim feedback was, we're not ready to come back for quite a while. So there's about 30% of you that said, don't even want to see it half full. So this gives you an idea of where the congregation is on that. Would you be willing to attend at a different time? Pretty good group of you said yes. If I can take the yeses and combine them with the if yes, tell us your preferred evening, that's over 60% willing to meet at a different time. Age groups, pretty well split. You can see we had exactly 100 at this point in time, from 30 to 49 and 50 to 65. So that gives you a sense of the survey. So I think generally speaking, people were of common mind, a lot of common feeling. Of course, we have extremes on both ends as well. Okay, with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go deeper into the plan. And there is also a link for this in the Friday Heads Up Hillside to see the full plan. I'm going to try to summarize it for you. First, the 8 principles that we had in setting the plan, you can see that in the full plan. I'm just going to go over 3 or 4 of them real quickly, refer to my notes. First, we wanted to focus on what's best for the whole Hillside community and be mindful of those who are more vulnerable, either because of their age or pre-existing conditions. Maybe they work in medical or live with somebody in medical. Second, we wanted to honor federal, state, and local guidelines and denominational recommendations wherever possible. It's really important to note here that contrary to popular opinion, we are allowed to worship in the state of Michigan and have been ever since March 24. But the government has also recommended that we adhere to the social distancing guidelines and the limitations on sizes. So we have been adhering to that, and we plan to adhere to that going forward for health reasons. That's really why. It's for health. Finally, a quick one I want to mention is we really are seeking to honor differing concerns and desires of people. We all have different ideas about how fast we should come back and how much this virus is of a concern. So we have to try to live with each other in harmony on that and have some humility and grace with each other as well. So with that, I want to kind of go into the plan, but maybe some terminology would also help to explain, is that I'm going to talk about 4 steps of Hillside. We're currently in step 1, and we have been for the last 2 months, which corresponds with Michigan's Safe Start 6-stage plan of stage 3. So as we now have learned that Michigan will allow gatherings of under 10, Michigan's partially going into stage 4. So we will be partially going into step 2. And then step 3 for us would be stage 5 for Michigan and so forth. So maybe that helps up front. There's more clarification in the deck. So as we just said, we are now just getting into step 2. And so what does step 2 look like for Hillside? Given that gatherings are limited to under 10, we don't see communal worship as a realistic option right now if we're trying to adhere to those guidelines. Even if the guideline was raised to under 50, that's really difficult. We looked at a lot of different scenarios of rotations and different things, and it just doesn't seem practical when you start factoring in the number of people already participating in the worship service. It makes it very, very difficult to accomplish a worship service. So in this particular step 2 or Michigan stage 4, we don't envision communal worship. What about other church activities? Starting June 1, we will entertain the notion of small groups under 10 who want to use the building. The ministry directors and staff are looking at the type of groups that might make sense. Of course, it's also summer, less people are meeting. And then Andy and the staff are putting together a pretty comprehensive plan and list of protocols that you would need to follow in order to use the building. We would need 3 days advance notice. We need to make sure it's very clean and you follow those protocols. And we'll share more of that soon. But starting June 1, small groups being able to use the building with advance notice. Okay, so that is basically step 2 where we're in right now. As we then approach step 3, step 3 is where Michigan would say they're in stage 5. And let's say large gatherings that then might be limited to something like 150. So we would begin communal worship in that stage. And we would be, again, honoring the limitations on size gatherings that are provided. We'd be following the recommended physical distancing protocols that are in place at that particular point in time. And we'd be adhering to those 8 principles that I referred to in our plan. Some of the protocols you can imagine us following in stage 3 are from the survey that most of you agreed with. Appropriate physical distancing, greeters not shaking hands or shaking hands during a greeting during the service, making sure that we've got the hand sanitizers and that we're looking at different ways to do the Lord's Supper and to collect offerings, things of that nature. Likely dismissals being done in a more structured manner to avoid crowding and the like. Some steps we're still evaluating in this particular phase would be, what about the use of face masks when we're at 150? We'd probably follow the guidelines that are being recommended. If it's highly recommended, we would highly recommend it. We are also looking at different types of services within this step. So imagine we could have gatherings of 150. You could imagine maybe doing 3 services at that point, maybe 1 on a Sunday morning. Don't want to try to do 2 right away to make sure we've got adequate cleaning and sanitizing between services. We could imagine a Sunday night or a Wednesday night or both. We can imagine scenarios where we have a service just for families with small children that might be a little shorter. We can imagine a service just for the elderly or those that maybe are more health prone, have health issues. We can also imagine an outdoor service that comes with some complications and challenges, but we can also look at that. And we are considering that as well because less contagion being outside. So those are still some items being considered right now. So that would be our step 3. And then step 4 is post-pandemic. We're all excited by that. That would correspond to Michigan's stage 6. Pre-vaccine, there's probably still some guidelines that we would be trying to follow, whatever those guidelines might be at the time from health officials. A disclaimer on all of this, again, as I noted up front, this plan is not set in stone. It's considered to be a working document that really assists in giving direction into an unknown future. And we're going to flex and adjust as we learn more. We know that it might be necessary to move between steps and stages if another outbreak would occur. We hope that doesn't happen. And we all have to be mindful of the risks, right? Particularly those who are older or those who have pre-existing health conditions. And finally, again, I want to just make a plea that we try to live in unity. We try to honor our differences. We all come at this from a little bit different angle. I know not everyone will be happy with this plan, and we look forward to hearing from you and getting feedback from you. I do want to try to summarize the plan in 1 page, and this is also on your full link. But let me play this a minute here. Let me get this up here. Oops, wrong document. What I'm trying to pull up here is a document that will summarize in 1 page what the plan is. And here we go. So you should be seeing my screen now where step 1 is the step we were in the past 2 months, which corresponds to Michigan stage 3. We're just entering step 2, which corresponds to Michigan just starting to enter stage 4, where the current gathering limit's under 10. Worship would continue on live stream. Feel free to meet in each other's homes as well. Small groups under 10 can meet in the building with advance notice starting June 1. Step 3 would be when Michigan moves into stage 5, and we don't know the size limitations on those larger gatherings yet. we would flex within that in terms of our communal worship. And then groups under that same size could meet at the church with advance notice. And then we all pray and long for the day of step 4, where we're post-pandemic, and we can kind of go back to a new normal. So that's the plan. Please make sure to also look in the full plan. You'll see the sources and different links that we used. We were able to use a lot from a lot of different sources: health departments, reopeningchurch.org, other churches like Covenant CRC in Cutlerville. We're really paying attention to that and trying to learn and share from each other. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you at any time. Please contact a staff member, a council member, or call me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.